5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, ignition, liftoff.
You're listening to the GHT Overland podcast.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining us on the GHT Overland podcast. This is where you get the greatest
news.
I think that's the noise. We interrupt our normal intro because there's way more important news to share. Thanks to the prayers and well wishes of all of you.
Thanks to the powers that be within the Australian government, Jolie and Mark are home.
A big thank you to Dave of Polaris Overland, a past guest with his wife Angela, who passed on the news to us last Saturday.
We are still overflowing with joy for Jolie and Mark and their families.
We're looking forward to hearing from them when the time is right, but just relieved they have been released with all charges dropped.
Welcome home, Jolie and Mark. We could not be happier for you.
Woo! Oh, sorry. Here's to cheering to your freedom, safety, and good health. Whoops. Hopefully you're not listening on headphones. That was not too loud. We will be drinking throughout this episode in celebration for Jolie and Mark. Feel free to join in.
If it's safe for you to do so.
Oh, you were always about the rules. There's about 2,000 of you a week that listen in. So Jolie and Mark, here's the first 2,000-person virtual welcome home party of all Overland enthusiasts from quite literally around the globe anyone has probably ever had. Okay. Where do we leave off?
This is where you get the best interviews and insights from overland travelers around the globe.
You are about to learn the basics to the advanced in overlanding directly from Cory and Brie, so buckle up and get ready for more adventure. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lisa. This is part 2 with Cory and Brie of Ullr Goes South, as we caught up with them in Chile.
Chile? Chile.
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 Not shit. Chile.
We got to work on that. Last week, we learned from Ullr, the god of winter.
A mega moon. Honeymoon overlander style.
Rethinking how much snorkel gear do you take? All of that like a good street taco packed with juicy stories and details.
This week, you'll want to buckle up as we discuss overlander safety on the road, finances, and more great road stories.
Do tacos really have juicy stories and details? I don't know where I got that from.
Tim says they do.
Are you ready?
Oh, I'm ready.
Robberies are not necessarily even recent, but just kind of historical. People have been robbed, or I think talking to locals is a really good resource. They know what's going on. You have to be a little bit careful because they definitely have a tendency to think any border that they're neighboring is more dangerous than their own country. So if you're like, okay, I'm going to this next country, they're like, oh gosh, don't go there, it's really dangerous. And we just kind of picked up on that being a theme along the way, but they usually can tell you if a road is like safe to travel or not. There's some spots too, like I remember being in Lake Atatlan in Guatemala, and there's a specific stretch of road that is kind of notorious for robberies, but oftentimes the local police will escort you. So there's resources out there to help you. And then I think the other like huge thing is just not driving at night. And more times than not, it's just so you don't fall in a pothole or hit livestock. But I also think that it's helpful, like if if there is something sketchy that's about to happen. I think just driving during the day can help eliminate some of that.
Okay, cool. And how do you make sure that you understand what the local rules and laws and regulations are and you don't get yourselves into a jam? Specifically, you had mentioned if you've got a drone, you want to get some really awesome aerial shots. How are you making sure that you're following all the rules and, like I said, you don't get yourself into a jam?
Yeah, a lot of it is either, reading different blogs or just taking a look at, iOverlander or the Pan American Facebook group. Some stuff comes from word of mouth. Really, the only thing that comes to mind was the drone thing in Nicaragua, in terms of like a local regulation that we wanted to follow. And so in those countries, we just didn't fly the drone. And so that's kind of how if we find a rule that, people are talking about, saying that, had trouble with it in the past, then we'll just not do the thing that the country doesn't want us to do.
Yeah.
Okay. So you were able to find that like on iOverlander or through some of the Facebook groups?
Right. Yeah. So on iOverlander, it was listed within the border crossing. So they talked about some items that were not allowed into the country. And so if it's not allowed in, then we'll choose whether or not we're going to, leave that particular item behind or choose to discreetly hide it and then just make sure we don't use it or pull it out or anything.
What's your theory on paying or not paying bribes?
I guess it's situation dependent, and I don't judge people necessarily if they do just based on the situation. I think we in general agree with not perpetuating the issue of bribery or doing your best to avoid that situation. So definitely, there's kind of tips that we've heard and we've used some of them ourselves. Like if you get pulled over and they're trying to extort you, which happened to us, like just don't pay it and say like, let's go back to the police station, and they'll either give up there, or in our case, we actually went back to the police station, but just trying not to give in. And I think being patient and just making sure that you do allow yourself enough time to get where you're going, to where, if you're having to go back and forth with a person, like a police officer, like if it takes 2 hours, like it takes 2 hours and it sucks and it delayed where you're trying to get to, but at least in our instance, like it didn't impact, we weren't driving at night and it was fine. So I think just making sure that you have patience and just kind of hold your ground on that stuff. So yeah.
And it also goes a long way just saying that, you don't speak Spanish. No hablo español. Goes a hell of a long ways, because they'll realize that they can't communicate with you, and they'll just get frustrated and then end up giving up on the situation. So feigning ignorance certainly goes a long ways.
And do you speak Spanish?
No.
That's nice unison.
We're super embarrassed to admit it because we've tried really hard, but yeah, we tried and then we didn't really do a good job of practicing with each other. We'd always just speak English, and then once you get past like Peru, like the Spanish in Chile is so hard to understand. They use different words. They speak really fast. They kind of like cut their words off. And then Argentina, they speak differently there as well. And so we didn't have it dialed before we got here. And then once we got here, we're like, well, it's a lost cause at this point.
We have hope.
We'll fit right in. Any tips on changing currency as you go into and out of each country?
Yeah, we've been like lucky there where at least in the US, if you have a Charles Schwab checking account, you can get their debit card, and because they don't have like physical banks, they will refund any ATM fee. And so that's been huge because ATM fees like down here are like $8 or $10 a pop. Ooh. And so we basically try to just budget, like if we know we're leaving a country in the next couple days or week, like we will try not to pull out more money than we need. And so then we're never really left with a ton. I think we've exchanged maybe once or twice, but then we won't be left with a ton of money. And then whatever country we're in, we'll just go to the nearest ATM. And that's been really convenient because we don't have to search out a specific ATM. We can just go to whatever and pull money out in the local currency, and then our fees get refunded.
And how are you handling auto and health insurance?
That's a good question. So on the auto side of things, we just get insurance in each country. So it's all just liability insurance, and so we don't have full coverage on the truck. We have just the liability insurance in each country, and usually find information about the insurance for each company. Some countries require it, some countries don't, but usually you can find some stuff on iOverlander, or you can we'll search the Pan American Facebook group just for insurance information. Sometimes it's an online insurance. Sometimes you have to physically get a piece of paper from an insurance agency, but each country is a little bit different.
Is there an average cost that you find on that?
It's pretty inexpensive. I want to say it's usually around $30 a month.
I think it's less than that. It depends. Like I remember in Nicaragua, you had to get the mandatory insurance like at the border, and I want to say it was like $10 or like $12 for the month. And then we in Chile and Argentina, we have insurance that covers both countries, and I think it's like $20 a month, 25 maybe. So somewhere in that range, like 10 to 20 is what we found. It definitely hasn't been one of those expenses that we're like, oh gosh, that's way more than we thought it'd be.
Yeah.
And how is the health insurance working?
Yeah, so that's kind of a sticky situation, particularly for us, because we purchased a international health insurance plan, kind of more for catastrophic type injuries, and so we got it through a company called IMG, and we wanted coverage for both the U.S. as well as the rest of the trip. And so when I broke my leg back home, we were kind of concerned about how that was all going to work out. But luckily, we figured we had insurance. At this point, they've denied our claims. And so we're kind of in the middle of a battle with them. But basically what happened is I was backcountry skiing, and within the policy, it says if you're skiing outside of the boundaries, then excludes coverage. And so I would recommend for anybody that is looking to purchase insurance for a trip like this that you read the fine print and just get a better understanding of what's excluded. We're still hopeful that we will be able to get our appeals processed, and that we can still receive claims and settlement from IMG. But at this point, it's still up in the air.
Yeah, and on that note, like a lot of in the fine print, there's a lot of exceptions for like high elevation type activities, which if you're in Peru or Bolivia, they're pretty much all at high elevation. So just make sure you kind of read that stuff and you're comfortable with the risk you're taking. But yeah.
Let's dive deeper on finances. One of the most common questions asked is, how can you afford to do what you're doing? Or I'm sure you've gotten the famous, you must have won the lottery or be rich. Obviously, the real question is, how can we do what you're doing? Or how can our listeners mimic what you've done? What would be your number one tip on funding a trip like yours?
Yeah, I think it's really important to talk about what you are trying to get out of the trip, and how long you intend to be on the road. If you need to figure out if you're going to work while you're on the road or not. And for us, we knew that we would be on the road about a year. So it wasn't something that we took off without an end date or thought that this would be our lifestyle for the foreseeable years to come. So I think the way that we kind of saved and budgeted might be different than other people that are doing it more long term. And it was something that we talked about, well in advance of doing the trip. Like we talked about it for probably 2 years before we took off, and then really got serious about a year and a half before we left. So we just started saving money and trying to make conscious decisions about how we spent while we were living in Seattle. And then as far as our budget, we target about $100 a day between the two of us. And we've been able to stick to that pretty well. We've had some budget busters. Like we chose to go to the Galapagos Islands and thought that that was definitely a kind of a once in a lifetime. So we were okay with spending that, but there's definitely ways to do it cheaper, and you totally could. But for us, we wanted to make sure that we were doing some of the things that we felt like were kind of once in a lifetime opportunities, being in the spots that we were. I don't know, Cory, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I'd say, driving ends up being our biggest expense in terms of gas.
Yeah.
And so if you can slow down, that'll certainly drop, your dollars per day. Brie has also been super good about managing all of our expenses. She holds a spreadsheet that she fills out every day, just logging all of our expenses. And so you can, at the end of each month or whenever we want, we can just take a look at that and kind of see where our biggest expenses are coming from, how we're doing on trying to stay within that $100 per day budget. And so, having some sort of way to track your expenses, just having it visible is really helpful.
That's cool. In the Galapagos, would you say that was worth it?
Yeah, for us it was, for sure.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
I think like the beauty of being an overland traveler is you have flexibility on your schedule. And so, I think it would be really, really expensive if you were flying from the US and doing that and you had to book it in advance. But for us, we were able to book like super last minute, like boat tours or whatever. And it was easily like over 50% cost savings doing it that way. But that would be really hard to do if you're planning, a 2-week vacation from the US or something. But for us, we flew out of Quito, and flights are pretty easy to get, and we booked a last minute boat. And so, yeah, it's a really unique place. You see really unique things, and yeah, it was pretty special for sure.
Cool. Thank you for going through those details. That's super helpful.
Yeah, of course.
On navigation and communication, what are you using for navigation, either apps, paper maps, or GPS?
Yeah, so we bought a whole bunch of maps, and I think we've only used one so far. And so
who knew paper maps are antiquated?
So yeah,
don't tell the old guys.
Yeah, so we primarily use actually Google Maps. I know a lot of people are fans of Maps.me. We've used Maps.me a couple of times, but we found Google Maps to provide all of our navigation needs. We'll get burned every once in a while, but for the most part, if you just kind of take a look at the route, make sure that's going on major highways and things, it does a pretty great job for us.
And then definitely iOverlander. That's a huge resource, especially if you're in places without service and we didn't download the map. It can still kind of guide you where you need to go, and that's super helpful with figuring out where to stay and all sorts of stuff. So we use that a lot. And I'm trying to think. Yeah, as far as navigation, it's really just kind of Google Maps and iOverlander. And then for communication, we use, so for cell service, Cory did a lot of research on this, and we use Google Fi, and we have one phone that is set up with like cell and text capability, and then Cory's phone is a data only plan, so he can't make calls or text unless he's on Wi-Fi. Is that right, Cory?
Well, I also have just a digital phone number that I can use to make calls over data. Over data,
yeah. And for us, it's been really nice because so I think it's $20 a month for my phone to have calls and data, and then it's you pay $10 per gig of data up to 6 gigs, so $60. And then from 6 gigs to 15, it's free after that. So it's definitely not cheap, but we avoid having to go get a new SIM card in every country that we're in and re-upping it. And it's been really consistent with like service and being able to use it in each country. So we're fans of the Google Fi program.
All right, cool. And I was looking at your website. I think you guys are using a Garmin InReach opposed to a Spot. Is that right?
Yeah.
Cool. And are you fans of the InReach? Are you liking it?
Yeah, we do like it. We've been laying the breadcrumbs as we go, and so that's nice for friends and family to be able to see kind of where we're at on a daily basis. And then we have found quite a few situations where we're using the text feature on the InReach, in different places where we're out of cell service. We can fire off a few texts each month, letting people either know where we're at or if we need any kind of communication type stuff. So we have found that the InReach is nice also for peace of mind. We're out hiking and skiing in the backcountry a lot of times, and so having that for peace of mind is great.
Yeah, we don't really use it much for like GPS navigation, which is a little bit ironic because I'm pretty sure that's what Garmin's known for. But we use it more as a communication device, and then also just laying our track of where we are, which we like. But yeah, it's really nice. Like there was a time we were in the Altiplano in Bolivia with our friends John and Carrie, and their van was doing some weird things, and we were able to text my dad through the Garmin GPS and have him Google the like what was happening, and then he would text us back and we'd try new things. And it was kind of hilarious being out in the desert in the middle of nowhere, and like the texts take a while to like send and receive, so it wasn't quick communication, but it was really helpful. So we like having it.
Yep, I would agree. They're pretty awesome. So let's go through some onboard necessities real quick. How much fuel can you carry? How far does that take you? And how do you calculate your fuel needs?
That's a great question. So we have just the stock tank on the Tacoma. I think it's 80 liters, I think. And then we have just a 20-liter jerry can on the back. The fuel calculations is a little bit of an estimation. So we try not to go below a quarter tank before we're filling up. And if we're coming up on a spot where we think that fuel might be an issue, we make sure we top off both the jerry can as well as the truck. But to be honest, I haven't calculated the exact range that we can go. But there's a lot of gas stations kind of throughout this trip. The only issue that we had was early in the trip in Baja. About halfway down, there was warnings all over iOverlander that we didn't check that said that there was a big stretch of no gas station, and so we had to resort to some bootleg gas kind of throughout that little stretch there. And
we found out that we can go like 70 kilometers on empty, so that was a good lesson to learn early on.
Oh, that's helpful to know.
Yeah, we were pretty gripped on that one.
That's cool. Yeah, a little stressful.
Yeah.
So how much water can you carry, and how are you filtering water when needed?
Yeah, so we the four-wheel camper has a 30-liter tank, and so we always just get filtered water. So we'll always either just ask if a hose is potable, or we'll buy just the 20-liter jugs of water and then siphon it into the tank, or go to a water filtration station and get water that way. Really hasn't been much of an issue for us on this trip getting filtered water. If we're out backpacking or we find ourselves in the situation that we need to filter some water, we have what's called a Grail for filtration, and that works out super well.
Yeah, and it's a water bottle that has it's kind of like a French press, so it has an inner and outer shell, and the inner part has a filter like built on it that's you can replace it. And so basically you just like fill the outer with water and then push the filter through, and then it's a water bottle. So it's really nice for hiking. Like if there's a stream, it's really easy to get water that way.
Oh,
And then
yeah.
we've used it at like hotels or hostels we've been at where we're not totally sure if it's potable or we don't want to take the risk. We'll have that as a backup if we're not in the camper.
Okay. And do you use solar or a generator?
We have solar. We have 200 watts of solar on the roof, and then we have a 120 amp hour battery in the truck, as well as the batteries hooked up to the alternator on the truck. And so that has been sufficient for all of our power needs. The refrigerator pulls off of the battery as well, and that's kind of the biggest draw would be that fridge. And so that's kind of the thing that you always kind of keep an eye on, especially in the warmer climates. Really, it's only been an issue when we've kind of had like a partial shading in the warmer areas. And so we can usually go about a day in some of the warmer climates, so over 80 degrees, before we need to start worrying about getting some more solar. But yeah, we've been super happy with our solar and battery setup for this trip. It's been perfect for our needs, I'd say.
Okay. And any specific recovery gear you use or would recommend?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have some recovery gear that we haven't had to use so far. The Tacoma has been great in all kind of 4x type scenarios. And we've been in some sticky situations, such as kind of deep sand, deep mud, stuff like that, stuff where I thought for sure we'd get stuck, but it just has no problem just crawling out of those situations. But we do have a set of max tracks as well as a tow strap in case of any of those scenarios. We just haven't ran into them yet.
We also have a like I don't know what the proper name for it, but a jumper cable box. What would you call that? You know?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a jumper cable box. So rather than having just jumper cables, it's just a tiny little box. It's about double the size of a cell phone, and it has a couple of battery leads on it, and it'll jump a car, which is kind of crazy. And we haven't used it yet on our truck, but we've helped out some other people with dead batteries with that. So that's been super handy.
Yeah, those are super cool. So road stories are always a favorite. What's a favorite road story of yours, or maybe a situation where you were nervous going into, and how did it turn out for you?
Well, I think back to that scenario with our friends John and Carrie when we were in Bolivia on the Lagunas route. Yeah, but up at those higher elevations, diesel rigs, they seem to have real tough time with that altitude, both in terms of how cold it gets at night, but also just the lower levels of oxygen just really causes problems specifically with diesels. And so John and Carrie's, they have a Sprinter van, a diesel Sprinter van, and it was they were getting some error codes based off of the air intake. And so we were fortunate enough to have the Garmin so that we could text those error codes back to family back home, and they got us some answers that way. But then we actually woke up the next day and we couldn't get their car started. It was we figured that the diesel had gelled up too bad. We couldn't get it going, so we ended up spending many hours. Had like this
4 or 5 hours.
4 or 5 hours, kind of just in direct sun. So we figured it'd kind of heat up, but that didn't work. So then we put a stove actually underneath the van in order to try and warm up that engine. So that was an interesting situation because here we are thinking that we can wake up at 10 o'clock and kind of hit the road, and we ended up sticking around until, I don't know, middle of the afternoon trying to get the car running. And so hard to get very far when you have to wait until 2 or 3 in the afternoon before you can leave.
Yeah.
Yeah, no kidding.
I think.
But it sounds like you got it running.
We did, yeah, got it running, and at that point, John and Carrie, it was our first day into the trek there, and so they decided to turn back, and we kept going. But yeah, anybody with a diesel, just make sure you try and take some precautions, such as fuel additives to try and prevent that gelling, as well as we've heard recommendations for just waking up throughout the night and starting your car, especially at those kind of colder, higher elevations.
And make sure you park where your engine is facing the sun in the morning so that it can get the direct sunlight. It helps quite a bit. Yeah.
Yep.
And I think for me too, like my favorite road stories are just the people you meet and kind of how you might hang out in one area and go your separate ways, then you loop back and meet up again. For us, one of the more fun kind of connections we made, Cory was surfing in Costa Rica and in the water just started talking to another guy, and he happened to be from Santiago, Chile, and he was super friendly, and he and his girlfriend were in Costa Rica just on vacation, and so we started chatting with them and had a couple beers, and they were giving us recommendations on things to see in Chile and where to go, and then they just kind of like kept in touch with us following our Instagram and would kind of comment on things here and there. So we just stayed in touch with them. And then when we actually got to Santiago, we reached out and said, hey, let's grab dinner, just kind of thinking we'd meet up. And then he ended up inviting us to actually like stay with him and his family at their house. And he was the most helpful, like gracious host. His mom made us like a homemade Chilean dinner. He took us on a hike that kind of only locals know about. He like toured us around. They just ended up being like so friendly and so nice. And it's just like, what a small world, like you meet someone on the beach randomly in Costa Rica and then you end up staying with them for a couple days in Santiago. And yeah, they were great. So stuff like
That's
that.
Awesome. Yeah. That's really cool. So any helping others, doing good, or philanthropy that you focus on while you're overlanding, or opportunities that you've seen that maybe our listeners would be interested in knowing about?
Yeah. I think we feel a little bit insufficient in this category. Our friends, Candace and Jordan at Field Later, they do a ton of philanthropy and volunteer opportunities. So they'd be a really good resource for people wanting to know like what to do in specific areas. For us, we haven't spent a ton of time doing like volunteer stuff. Just we've been a little bit kind of moving pretty quick on this trip, really. But for us, we've tried to make conscious decisions to support just locals and kind of make sure we're supporting businesses that give back to the communities. So, for example, we did a Spanish school in Lake Atitlan, Guatemala, and we chose one because they're part of their proceeds and the mission is to help girls in the community with educating girls in the community. And so that was a mission that we thought was pretty cool. So we chose to go with them. And then when we were doing another hike, we were hiking Acatenango in Guatemala, and it's a pretty touristy, like a lot of tour operators take people there, and tour operators are fine. We don't have an issue with them, but we had read on iOverlander, there was a guy that lived right by the mountain, like local, and he ran his own guiding business with his sons and his brother. And so we opted to go with him, and it turned out to be such a great experience because he let us like stay with his family the first night, and his wife cooked us dinner, and his son like ended up being our guide, and it was great. So we try to just kind of make more like conscious decisions like that when we are choosing to engage with a guide or things like that.
Yeah, that's cool. Super smart. So this has been a lot of fun. Anything that we've missed?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah, I think that covers it. But I think, for anybody that's looking to do like a trip like this, you can plan everything out, but it is important to be flexible on a trip like this. You don't want to have everything just cemented in stone, got to be here, got to be there, because you're just going to find so many interesting situations and interesting things to do kind of along the way. I mean, it's one of those you overthink, you stink type scenarios. And so that would be kind of my biggest advice to anybody looking to do a trip like this.
I'm so embarrassed. Corey taglined the overthink you stink line.
I kind of like it.
I was like, do not say that. But it's true, though. You totally can overthink it, and there's just so much that you can figure out on the road. And the other thing that I would add is just don't underestimate the overlanding community. There's so many resources. You know, we've mentioned a couple in terms of technology with the iOverlander app and the Pan American Facebook group, but like the people you meet, both in terms of other overlanders as well as just locals, we've been not surprised, but everyone is just so kind and generous and willing to help you. So I definitely say, like, don't have a fear of the unknown. I think it's scary sometimes going to countries where they might have a bad rap, but we've had nothing but really good experiences and really kind people. And if you need questions answered, any overlander is more than willing and probably will give you more information than you want to help you kind of get along in your journey. So definitely like use the resources available to you.
Let's wrap it up with some fun facts about you. What keeps your co-driver occupied on long drives?
Listen to a lot of podcasts, a lot of music.
Yeah. Corey does most of the driving. Read all the driving. And I'm super lucky. He doesn't get annoyed if I'm like reading a book or watching a show on my iPad. I know a lot of other people, like drivers, get annoyed when they have to drive and the other person's like getting to enjoy something, but I'm super lucky. He doesn't really mind. So sometimes I'll kind of zone out and do one of those things. But yeah, we listen to a lot of podcasts. I try to do a good job of updating my Spotify playlist and keep the music fresh. So yeah, and just sightseeing, staring out the window. A lot of beautiful scenery here.
Do you play any musical instruments on the road or around the campfire at night?
We do not. No, we don't have the music talent for such activities.
Yeah, neither do we.
And what's your favorite drink in the morning to get you going?
Whiskey.
No.
All right, Chris is heading.
Everyone's gonna think we're a bunch of lushes. Definitely coffee. Yeah, for sure. And I would say that was one thing. Dialing in your coffee situation is super important if you're a coffee drinker. And we were lucky, like before we went on this trip, we had the camper for a couple of years and we use it on weekends, and we used to have a French press. But they are so annoying to clean, particularly on an overlanding trip like this. So we moved over to the pour over method, and we like that quite a bit.
Right on. And what's a favorite beverage at night to wind down after a long day on the road?
Depends what country you're in. Drink a lot of beer in Central America, light beer. They each have their own national brand that they all taste the same. And then once we hit Argentina, like really good wine is so cheap, like $4 a bottle.
Oh, nice.
So we've been drinking a lot of wine lately. And then Corey likes whiskey every now and then.
Yeah, so you guys are from the Northwest. What kind of beer is your favorite?
We like IPAs for sure.
Classic. Yeah.
That was almost a guarantee.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's hard to find a good one on the road. I'll tell you that much. Yeah, we found a couple. We've found a couple of breweries that we've really liked. But yeah, a lot of light beer on this trip.
Mm-hmm.
What is your best advice to aspiring overlanders like us?
Well, I think covered it a little bit before, but yeah, just go. Set that date. Try and be as prepared as you can up until that point. But when that date's there, just hit the road. You can figure out a lot of stuff on the road. Lots of people to help you. Lots of resources out there. So you're always going to feel underprepared when you leave on a trip like this. But it's important just to hit the road, and you'll just figure out so much stuff along the way.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think too, like I mentioned earlier, just know that you have a really great community in overlanding, and you can get a lot of help along the way, and you're going to meet really wonderful people. And then the only other thing I would say, I mean, if you're really, really fresh, like starting to think about it, as in you don't already have a vehicle and you're trying to figure out what's right, just kind of prioritize what type of trip you want. Like if you're doing this long term and it's going to be your home, you might value some different things versus, for us, it was definitely just adventure and hiking and getting places, and going up to the mountain was a big priority. So for us, having a vehicle that allowed us to do that really easily, and we kind of maybe would sacrifice a little bit on space or being inconspicuous in cities, not having a van, just weigh some of those decisions to make sure you get the right setup for yourself.
That's perfect. So how can people learn more about you and what you're doing?
Yeah, we have a Instagram account dedicated to our trip called Ullr Goes South. And then we also have been updating a blog, sometimes consistently, sometimes not. And that is WordPress.
No, it's UllrGoesSouth.wordpress.com.
There you go.
Perfect. And we will put that in the show notes as well. Any other ways that people should connect with you?
I mean, they can call us if they want. You can give our number out. But no, I think we're on Instagram pretty regularly, and direct messaging there is probably the easiest way. And we're happy to answer questions and help people out.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for your time. We are humbled that you've given us such an amazing look into your world, experiences, and knowledge. Safe travels and adventures to you, and we hope to catch up with you again in the future.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Like we said before, you guys were a huge resource for us, when we were putting this trip together. So really appreciate all that you're doing with this podcast. And thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yeah, this was fun. Thank you.
Wowza. That is such a heartwarming compliment. Someone who listened to episodes before they left on their overlanding adventure, and now they're a year into it. So cool.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It's pretty awesome. So from the Galapagos Islands, I think that was the first that anybody mentioned those. Oh. That was pretty sweet. Would you go to the Galapagos Islands if I hit the parking brake?
Yeah.
And say, get out.
Yes, I would.
Going on a trip.
I'm taking a break.
On a boat. To an island.
Yes, I'm going.
But I don't think they serve drinks and bikinis there.
I thought I was alone on the boat.
Oh, we would go together.
Sorry.
It's not alone time just yet. And another recommendation for Google Fi, that was pretty interesting. All the different methods that people use to get their Wi-Fi and connectivity to the wide world of no work. Man, that story of a 4-hour delay to warm up their friend's diesel with literally a stove underneath of it to get it started, that takes, I don't know, does it take patience if you're just like, we got beer, we're good?
Well, it was chilly.
Chile?
No, chilly.
It was beyond chilly. It was freaking cold. And once again, it's all about the people you meet and those experiences you share.
Love the conversation with Cory and Brie.
Thank you so much for your time and sharing your stories and experiences to the both of you. We really appreciate you guys taking the time. It was a lot of fun. Be sure to give Cory and Brie and Ullr at Ullr Goes South, so that is at Ullr_goes_south, a follow, and we'd recommend stopping over at their website. A simple Google search of Ullr Goes South will get you there. And they have a lot of great information. So their blog is really well done. Check it out. Thank you for listening. You can find us and tag us on all the social medias at GHT Overland. And we would be absolutely grateful if you'd consider telling a friend or two about the podcast, sharing with them all the great stories and tips from overland travelers around the globe. Overlanding is all about those experiences of meeting new friends, seeing the most amazing places on Earth, and of course, new food and new drinks.
For even more good overlanding karma, kindly subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, giving the GHT Overland podcast a little extra love. on your podcast platform of choice. You can visit the show notes page on our website at ghtoverland.com/podcasts. Select the Ullr Go South episode. All the details and helpful links are already there for you.
A big thank you to our Patreon supporters. Your support of the podcast truly does mean the world to us. If you'd like to help support the show and possibly get a t-shirt and or a coffee mug that doubles as a sweet GNT mug at night, take a look at the options while you're there. If you'd like, you can send your questions, suggestions, and feedback to ghtoverlandpodcast@gmail.com.
GHT is showing gratitude, being humble, and having the tenacity to tackle your dreams. Thank you, and we will see you next Thursday for a brand new episode of the GHT Overland podcast. Bye.
What you drinking?
I'm drinking a pear seltzer.
I got me a double IPA from Nikasi. It's delicious.
It's quite refreshing.
See you next week.
Ciao.